Italian Wine Podcast. Chin Chin with Italian wine people.
Hello, this is the Italian Wine Podcast with me, Monty Waldin. In the hot seat today is Tim Manning, founder-owner of the Vinochisti, have I said that right?
You have indeed.
Winery in Panzano in Chianti Classico in Tuscany. Tim, let's start by asking, where are you from?
I was born in Manchester, brought up just outside Liverpool. A little place called the Wirral.
A little place called the Wirral?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, a little village on the Wirral called Greasby, but I don't think anybody's ever heard of Greasby.
Well, we've heard of it now. Okay, so how did you get into wine?
To be absolutely honest, I finished my degree in the early 90s and...
What did you study?
I studied agricultural science.
Oh, right, okay.
Which at the time I was studying in Edinburgh, focusing mostly on animals, so nothing really vine related. I didn't want to pursue a career, let's say, in that field and had to go and find some work. I ended up responding to an ad at a local odd-bin shop.
It's a wine shop?
Yes.
Chain of wine stores?
Chain of wine stores in the UK, fortunately, well, sort of exists still now. So that was up in Edinburgh. I began working there in October 95 just as a sales assistant, and basically that was the beginning.
So you knew nothing about wine at the time?
I had an interest, a kind of passing interest whilst I was at uni.
Drinking, basically?
Well, yes, I liked obviously drinking that as well, but I had some good friends and occasionally we'd kind of get together and go and buy some good bottles of wine and sit down and taste them and try and think that we sort of knew a little bit about them.
Do you remember any Italian wines that shook your tree at that period?
Well, when I first started working at Oddbins, one of the things that kind of ultimately led me to come here was actually a bottle of Cabernet Franc from a producer called Quintarelli from the Veneto region.
It's a French grape variety made by a famous Italian producer.
Very, very famous, but made in kind of quite a particular way too. And it just kind of stuck me. And one of the things I think also, apart from that bottle, which was fantastic, I just liked Italian wines because I found them very diverse, very interesting, and obviously at the time working as an impoverished sales assistant, they were relatively inexpensive as well. So yeah, it really kind of sparked my interest in wine, not only wine, but particularly Italian wine.
So what was your first job in Italy then? What were you doing and who were you working for and where?
So I came here in September 98, really on a bit of a whim. I'd been working for Oddbins up until relatively just before then. I decided that wine retail wasn't for me. I literally packed my job in. I grabbed myself a return airplane ticket which lasted a month, had about enough money to last me about 4 weeks, and I came to Italy with the hope of finding some work during harvest. There were two things that probably would have made that quite difficult. One was I didn't know anybody when I came here, and two, I didn't speak a word of Italian. After about 3 or something weeks of kind of basically wandering around the high roads and by roads of Chianti in particular, looking at the prospect of sort of ignominious return to the UK, by a series of fortunate coincidences came across a chap called Sean O'Callaghan, who at the time was the winemaker at Riecine, and after basically harassing him for about a week by telephone, he kind of succumbed and gave me a job picking grapes for the harvest of 98 at Riecine.
So you stayed? I
did, yeah. I worked with Sean for a few weeks picking grapes, which was enormous fun. And then at the end of that time, the chap who I worked with in the winery at the time, a guy called Pietro, who was basically Sean's right-hand man, he wanted to leave and go and work in a bigger winery. Sean was looking for somebody to fill his rather large shoes because he was a very good guy. And Sean basically asked me if I would like to stay here and end up doing Pietro's job, and he would teach me about viticulture and winemaking.
Right, so that was it basically?
Yeah.
What was the main thing you learnt from Sean O'Callaghan at Riecine at the time?
Well, it was obviously really my first introduction to a variety which I continue to work with and love, Sangiovese. Those wines at the Riecine Chiantis, the Chianti Classicos, are based either in part or entirely on just that variety. I'd never worked at all in a vineyard, I'd never driven a tractor, I didn't know how to spray vines or treat them or prune them, and Sean, along with Pietro, whilst we worked side by side for a few months, those two guys really taught me the basics, let's say, of how to look after a vineyard, how to grow grapes, how to harvest those grapes and transform them into wine.
You've been picking them at exactly the right time. Things like that.
Yeah, tasting, how the fermentation works, punching downs, pumping over, introducing things like using different types of wood, large casks, barriques. It really gave me a complete grounding in, how to make wine. And then along with the other experiences that I had following Riecine ended up allowing me, if you like, to begin to produce my own wine.
So were your family quite glad to see the back of you, or were they worried about you? Or?
No, I was in my late 20s when I came here, so I think my family were just very happy that I was pursuing something that they could see that I was genuinely passionate about. And obviously, they quite liked the fact that I was living here in Tuscany because, it's not a bad place to come and visit.
Okay, so the next step was Vinochisti, which is your own brand.
Yes, after Riecine, I worked for Riecine a bit. I actually then went back and completed a degree in winemaking down in New Zealand. I spent a bit of time working in New Zealand and the US with Pinot Noir specifically. Came back to Italy in 2004 to help begin making, or basically setting up a winemaking system at a producer called Il Borghetto.
Where is that?
Near San Casciano. Still is a family-run property. They had planted some vines, produced a very small amount of wine in 2003, but 2004 was really their first, let's say, commercial vintage, the very young vineyards.
So you were making the wine for them?
Yes.
How much more challenging was that, knowing that your arse is on the line? If you're working in someone else's winery and you make a mistake, they can say, well, actually, I didn't tell you how to do it right, it's my fault. Whereas if you're on your own...
Yes, I did sort of feel that my proverbial arse was a bit on the line, because when I arrived there, the owner, Antonio Cavallini, he had been making a bit of wine but didn't really have a sort of system in place to produce the wine that was of the grapes that were about to arrive from these new vineyards. And I'd just come back from working in Oregon for a producer called Christum, and I rather boldly persuaded him to adopt some methods of production which I was quite keen to experiment with, that I picked up from working with a chap called Steve Dorner at Christum.
And what does that mean there? It's about organisation you're talking about?
It was more about method.
Like what? Go on.
So Christum, this is a producer that sort of specialises, if you like, in single vineyard wines. I arrived at Borghetto in January 2004 and was immediately kind of struck by the fact that the vineyards were a small property but with lots and lots of small vineyards. And so I wanted to produce the wine on a vineyard by vineyard basis, and that involved doing small batch ferments. So I persuaded the owner he was all lined up to buy a couple of very large stainless steel tanks in which he would then ferment and to a certain degree age some of the wine. I persuaded him instead to buy about 25 1-ton plastic square bins, which we took us about several weeks to find on the internet because they're not really very readily available around here. And in 2004, the vintage 2004, I managed to persuade him to pretty much ferment every single vineyard block, of which there were over 20 in these small bins.
Was his bank manager happy with your idea?
He was very, very happy because the small bins, the plastic bins, cost an awful lot less than the money he had set aside for buying the stainless steel tank.
So basically he was going to put all his eggs into one single big omelette, and you said, actually, if you look after each egg separately, and make a boiled egg with one, a fried egg with another, a scrambled with another, and then we can see what we can do at the end of when everything is cooked, so to speak.
I didn't see the point in having this beautiful vineyard, these beautiful vineyards with different clones of Sangiovese, different rootstocks, in some cases different varieties as well, a little bit of Cabernet Sauvignon, a little bit of Merlot. I didn't see the point in putting all those things, or as you say, all those eggs in one basket, because, each vineyard, due to the fact of where it was, due to the fact of the clone of Sangiovese, the rootstock, obviously would express itself slightly differently. We also used whole clusters as well.
Whole bunches.
Whole bunches, yeah, which we selected according to the ripeness of the bunches in each of the different vineyards, so the percentages of whole bunches changed. And we basically, instead of pumping things over, which was a method that I'd come across obviously frequently from my previous work, not just at Riecine, but obviously having seen other Chianti Classico producers as well, we basically punched everything down.
So more Burgundian.
Very much so. Very Burgundian by proxy, I suppose, because...
Because basically a bloke from Manchester goes to Oregon. Oregon's influenced by Burgundy, comes back to Chianti...
And then starts...
And Burgundifies a very traditional Tuscan estate.
Yes.
So in terms of your own brand, Vinochisti, let's just talk about the name. Vinochisti, where's that from? You were a very smartly dressed, quietly spoken, polite young man.
Not so young.
And Vinochisti, what does it mean?
So, in 2006, I was obviously still working at Borghetto as their full-time winemaker. Since now I work more on a consultancy basis. A friend of mine who makes wine in Umbria, I met him one day and he'd asked me to try some Sagrantino, some very young Sagrantino.
A red wine grape.
Yes, from the kind of noble grape, red grape of Umbria. And I'd always kind of noticed the fact about Sagrantino of how just tough and tannic it could be. So I thought, I wouldn't mind getting a bit of this variety because it was a variety that I liked, a bit different to Sangiovese, and just to take a small number of grapes and sort of try and have a go myself. So I asked Antonio if I could do that at Borghetto, and he conceded and said, fine, no problem. So I ended up buying these grapes from a producer in Montefalco and bringing them by a kind of packing them into a hired van, bringing them to Borghetto and making them into wine there. I ended up producing wine, and I wanted to come up with a name. So the idea was, because it was the first then of other varieties that I worked with, this idea of taking indigenous Italian grape varieties from wherever they may appear in Italy and bringing them back to Tuscany and transforming them into wine how I wanted to do it. So without following any of the rules and regulations that you so often find in Italian wine production. And so I kind of thought of this and I thought, well, it's kind of a bit like making wine in a sort of a bit of an anarchistic way. And so I kind of thought, well, anarchy of winemaking, anarchist, Vinochist, that sounds like quite a catchy name. So Vinochist, and then I thought, because I'm in Italy, I'd make it sound a bit Italian. So I added an I on the end. So it became Vinochisti. So in the end, it doesn't really mean anything in English and it doesn't mean anything in Italian either. But anyway, I like the sound.
So which other, apart from Sagrantino from the Montefalco region in Umbria, which other grapes have you or are you working with indigenous Italian varieties?
So the Sagrantino was joined in 2009 by a white variety from a tiny appellation up in the north of Italy, close to Turin, called Erbaluce in Piemonte, so close to Ivrea in the province of Biella, I think it is. Through a friend of mine, I managed to find a grape grower who was prepared to sell me grapes, which is no mean feat because I think, if I'm right, there are only a couple of 100 hectares of Erbaluce, and most of it, well, none of it, in fact, I think it would be fair to say that none of it makes its way outside of that area, apart from the 3 tons of grapes that every year I go up and buy from 2009 from the same producer.
I mean, that Erbaluce has been called Piemonte's most underrated white grape variety. Do you go along with that?
One of the reasons that I wanted to, I kind of particularly focused on it was, I honestly can't remember the first time I tried the variety, but I can remember then trying it after from a few different producers. I don't know, there were bigger producers, the wines were well made, but quite simple. But I don't know, there was just something about it that I liked, and I thought maybe in the case of, let's say, Vinochisti, I don't know, doing a bit of skin contact fermentation, maybe aging a little bit in wood,
to making it a little bit like a red wine, skin contact. That's what you're trying to say, yeah.
Yeah, because the variety itself doesn't have particularly overpowering aromas, but it has a certain structure to it. I think that was the thing that kind of caught me, was that it had a kind of structure to it, but then in the examples that I tried, I didn't think the aromas, the flavours necessarily adequately sort of reflected that.
What typical flavours are we talking about?
Now, the wines that I produce, I think, could probably be considered to be very atypical. You know, I do use skin fermentation, in some cases up to several months. You know, this is, as you were saying, to give the wine a certain structure. You begin to make a wine a little bit like a red wine, so you actually extract very similar things, colour and tannin. So you give the wine an almost tannic structure that's obviously not like a red wine because it doesn't contain the same amount of tannin. Now I think I get, I suppose the 2 prevalent aromas and flavours would be, it has a very kind of flinty note and a white blossom peach
Where are your wines being sold to?
So we produce a very small amount. We're limited as to how many grapes we can collect in any one go. So that's around about 3 tons.
That's not very much.
No.
Sounds a lot, but it's tiny.
No, a couple of thousand bottles at the end. Our biggest market's the United States, a little bit to the UK. Funnily enough, have a reasonably buoyant market in Denmark. But we're always looking for small markets. It's more of a kind of niche market. People who might like to, let's say, experiment a little bit. I mean, these are kind of by their essence quite experimental wines. I mean, I'm not trying to make wines that nobody can drink. Obviously, I'd like to drink them myself, but more importantly, I'd like other people to enjoy them too. So I'm not producing a wine. We're not producing wine, just for the sake of experimenting. It's we're trying to produce something that in the end is a different slant, a different approach on a variety like Erbaluce, but in the end of the day, hopefully is enjoyable too.
I mean, both Sagrantino and Erbaluce could be described as underdog varieties.
Yes.
Are you someone that kind of goes for the underdog or not?
Yes, I think so.
I mean, Sangiovese, that's where you kind of got your grounding, and that's very much an aristocrat. Everybody knows it. It's the most planted wine grape in Italy, and now you're scrabbling around for these great varieties that are sort of barely on anybody's radar, apart from a few sort of Soms in New York, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I've since added other varieties. So a white variety, so for the first time, a Tuscan variety last year, a Vernaccia di San Giminiano. Mm-hmm. Again, yes, I think you could describe that a fair description would be as an underdog variety. It's one of the very few white appellations within Tuscany, purely white. And I think it's an often maligned variety. There are some outstanding producers, I think, but it tends to be... There are lots of quite big producers, I think, who produce perfectly adequate but not particularly interesting wine. So let's say we've given it a bit of the Vinochisti treatment.
What are you looking for in a good Vernaccia from San Giminiano?
Well, again, it's a variety that's more along the line of an Erbaluce. It's not a strongly aromatic variety. It doesn't base its character on very bright flavours and aromas. To me, it's about structure as well. And so I'm working again more on that rather than trying to transform it into a kind of fluffy, fruity variety, which it is not.
So white wine with a bit of mouthfeel to it, a bit of savoury texture.
Exactly, yes. So some skin contact, not as long as the Erbaluce, and a little bit of wood aging, but old wood, nothing new.
And a underdog red that you fancy?
Well, the other variety which we started working with a year or so ago, it's nearly due for bottling, is Lacrima di Morro, which from a red wine point of view, and talking about these white varieties which are not particularly aromatic, is the complete opposite of the red wine varieties. This is probably one of the most aromatic.
So where's it from and what does it taste of?
It's from the Marche, from a little area called Morro d'Alba, which can be a bit confusing because people sometimes think it's from Alba, from Piemonte.
So it's on the Adriatic coast?
Yes, not very far from Ancona. I would describe it as one of the noble varieties because it's one of the few really notable indigenous red varieties from the Marche. Most people, I think, maybe have heard of Verdicchio, the white variety, which is a fantastic variety as well. But Lacrima is indigenous to that area. By its nature, it produces wines that are very aromatic, very floral.
It's very fruity, isn't it? It's very obviously fruity.
Yeah.
Very kind of in your face, isn't it? I mean, you talked
absolutely.
about Vernaccia as a white, which is a very not in your face variety.
Yes, a very quite reserved variety. This is like
it's almost musky, isn't it, Lacrima?
It has. I mean, one of the things that stuck out to me was it smells like Turkish delight. It has this wonderful kind of rose petal aroma, which I think is fantastic. It's just so out of place for a red wine. And then, yes, often the fruit is kind of very sort of crunchy red fruit, very kind of, again, very kind of bright, sort of a little bit in your face. And so, yes, most of those properties are kind of taken advantage of from the point of view that most Lacrimas are made in a very simple, straightforward way to enhance those very typical properties of Lacrima. So they're wines made usually with very little short fermentations, very little post-fermentation maceration, aged for the period that they're aged, which is usually not very long in stainless steel. It's focusing upon those things rather than the kind of structure of the wine. I suppose if Vinochisti is about anything, it's a little bit about structure as well.
When you talk about structure, it's about wines that are good with food, good on their own.
Yes.
you're not talking about these big behemoth heavy.
No, absolutely not. No, I mean when I'm talking about structure, what I'm talking about
mouthfeel
is a kind of fine backbone of tannin. One of the things that I would like my wines to be known for, let's say, is if anybody describes my wines as elegant, then that for me is praise enough. Elegance is what we're about.
Tim Manning, the elegant anarchist in Italian wine. Very exciting project, and I hope to keep in touch. I hope to interview you again in the future, find out which other great varieties you're going to be working with. So I'm sure your project is going to grow. Very fascinating. Thanks for coming in on the Italian Wine Podcast. It's been a real pleasure to meet you.
Many thanks, Monty. Thank you.
Follow Italian Wine Podcast on Facebook and Instagram.